So I don't know if anybody saw this earlier, but Suella Braverman wrote this whole article where she made some really weird comments about Northern Ireland, comparing the protest to hate marches, not using the position of the police as being even-handed in a way that is anti-protest, right? She thinks they're being too even-handed in a way that's pro-protest, right? And saying, well, they were too heavy-handed with the lockdown protests, but weren't heavy-handed enough for the BLM protests, rather than the democratic position of thinking that all the protests are fine, which is my very consistent position on this. She's been called out for undermining the police by her own party. It turns out that she is angling pretty hard to be leader of the Conservative Party at this point, and is essentially poking the bear, trying to goad Sunak into sacking her, right? That's exactly what you make a power play against Fishy Rishi, which there's nothing that he can do. There's nothing that Sunak can do, because if Sunak doesn't cave to Braverman and keeps her in post, then she can keep pushing him around and prodding the buttons and poking the bear further, and it makes him look weak. And if he does get rid of her, it's impetus for her to then start a further leadership challenge. So Sunak's in this really weird bind where there's nothing that he can do. But it appears that the position that they've been taking has kind of flip-flopped continually on this one, like the internal party, because loads of Tories are absolutely furious with Braverman. They think either they think she's too far right, or she's undermining the message, or she's too busy making the party look united, making them look really divided. So it's really difficult at this point to know what to do with the Braverman problem if you're in the Conservative Party, because she's really popular amongst a very small section of the party and small section of society, but she's toxifying the party, she's undermining their unity and making them even less electable overall. Because swing voters do not want to see a divided party. They don't want to see Braverman acting like a psychopath, and Sunak is looking weak, and weak leaders don't look strong to the public who want to vote for them. So there's a real rock and a hard place situation going on in the Conservative Party right now. So this was 5 hours ago. Sky News report talking about Rishi Sunak having full confidence in Suella Braverman. Let's have a look.
Hello, good afternoon. There are calls for the Home Secretary to be sacked after she went on the attack against the Metropolitan Police, accusing them of playing favourites when it comes to controlling protests. In an opinion piece for The Times, Suella Braverman doubled down on her views ahead of a pro-Palestinian march planned for armistice.
It's crazy how, after all of what she's done so far, all of like the neo-rhetoric that she's engaged in, invasions on the south coast, multiculturalism has failed, right? There are people being important to have different values. Her talking about things like cultural Marxism, right? It's incredible that like the line that she's crossed is making fun of the Metropolitan Police. It just shows you how conservative ideology is, that the making fun of the pigs is the bad line that she's crossed, and none of the fashion stuff that she's done up to this point was too below the bar.
This weekend. Well, it's emerged that Number 10 did not fully sign off the article before it was published. And in the last few minutes, the Prime Minister's spokesman said that Rishi Sunak has full confidence in Ms Braverman. Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, joins me now from Westminster. Beth, Westminster watchers will say the phrase full confidence is usually the kiss of death for any minister.
Well, Jane, I was just listening into that briefing for journalists from the Prime Minister's official spokesperson, and it was not comfortable listening if the Home Secretary had indeed tuned in, because...
Is the tense thing as well? Well, actually... yeah, the tense thing actually did look a little bit too far. That was another line that she'd crossed. Not because I don't necessarily think the people in the Tory party disagree with what she's saying, but because the tense stuff is such horrendous optics, right? It makes you look like a genuine, like, evil villain, like Disney villain style levels of evil shit coming out of Braverman's mouth. And the Tories didn't want that to be kind of the front and centre of their policy platform, not because they care about whether the policy is good or not, but because they know that it makes them look bad, which is why the Number 10 then also rode back on it and didn't include it in stuff like the King's Speech or whatever, because they don't actually agree with what she's saying there in terms of whether or not they think the policy is popular or not.
While the Prime Minister's spokesperson kicked off saying that he had full confidence in the Home Secretary, this wasn't one of these press briefings where the official spokesman sought to play down any splits. Indeed, he was absolutely clear that this article had to be, quote the Prime Minister's spokesman, not been cleared by Number 10. And when he was asked whether the Prime Minister agreed the content of Suella Braverman's opinion piece in the Times. He said the content was not agreed with number 10.
I thought Sunak's brand was sort of tied up in Braverman, and they were trying to do a good cop, bad cop thing together, i.e. she was trying to appeal to the fascist. He was there for the Thatcherites. I actually think that that's not quite true, in that whilst I think that, I mean, there was definitely an idea to try and use her to try and win over the right-wingers who have kind of left the party to kind of move over to Reform UK. I think that was kind of the original plan that they had with Braverman in the role that she was in. But despite all of that, the issue that they have is that she's not on board with that kind of thing anymore. She wants to completely undermine the government to try and angle herself for a leadership position. And as I said before, like, Sunak is basically in this blackmailed position where she literally can't do it, like, they can't do anything against her anymore, and she's gone so rogue that even if that was the initial plan, that's not where it is anymore. Now she's a complete loose cannon who's played her political career kind of perfectly to be in the position that she's in.
There were then a series of questions about whether she broke the ministerial code. Was there going to be a formal investigation? And on all of this, the Prime Minister's official spokesperson took what I would describe as a holding position, saying that there is a process looking into what happened, wouldn't be drawn on the ministerial code, but rather...
Do you think she will launch a leadership pre-election? No, I think she wants to be removed from the front bench so that if something goes wrong at the next election, she can blame everybody else and not her. If she's on the front bench when the election happens, it means that she is partly to blame, so it weakens her leadership challenge post-election. But if she gets herself removed for being quote-unquote too right-wing, she can then come back afterwards and say to the membership, we lost for being too centrist. We lost for capitulating and going too left-wing, going too centrist, right? And me being fired is the inflection point that meant that we were never going to win the election. The only way to therefore resolve our quarrels, to be able to come back to winning ways, is to take the positions that I was taking that I got fired for and be an even more right-wing party. And that will be her leadership position that she'll get into.
Ominously said there might be a further update later. So I have to say, Jane, I mean, ever since this landed late last night, there has been a lot of anger around it. Many former cabinet ministers contacting me saying that they're shocked by some of the content. I was told that there is lots of disquiet being fed back to the whips. I've been told that the whips aren't even trying to defend Suella Braverman over this article, and there's concern amongst MPs that in writing this article, she has undermined the police ahead of the march, that she has
oh no, don't undermine the
undermined
police. Don't undermine our law enforcement community, who are definitely not people who should be undermined continually, given what we know from the Casey review.
The relationship between the Conservative Party and the DUP over some of her remarks over Northern Ireland in the article. But the Prime Minister is now in a position where his authority looks like it's being challenged. And
based Braverman attacking the unionists, right? Based Braverman, pro-Republican, let's fucking go, right? Maybe it'll be like this really weird position that she'll take where she becomes an Irish unity candidate.
In this press briefing, the Prime Minister's official spokesperson was also asked, does the Prime Minister think the Home Secretary respects his authority? And the answer...
Yeah, it's incredible that Braverman's managed to do this Disney villain act so well that she's become worse than Priti Patel.
Was a simple yes. But of course, the question here is, this is a Prime Minister now under pressure from opposition parties to sack Suella Braverman over these remarks, which many of her own MPs and his own MPs would say were inflammatory and undermined policing over the weekend. So he's been called to sack her. But then if he does sack her, it looks like he's been bounced by opposition parties. And if he doesn't sack her, some of his own MPs are saying to me it shows that he is too weak to move her out of position.
Do you think he will keep her on? Absolutely. He absolutely wants to keep her on. Now that it's obvious that she's angling for a leadership challenge and trying to get herself fired, Rishi Sunak has to keep her on to try and ensure that she doesn't challenge him further, right? especially when it comes to the election, and he doesn't want her to be usurping him at the end of the election. He wants to be able to have her to blame. If she's not in post come the next election, she can blame him for everything. But if she is still in post after doing all this come the next election, Sunak can palm off all of the blame onto Suella Braverman undermining his leadership and undermining the party. I mean, I would get rid of her, because I think that she is literally the most insane person that we've had in government in decades and decades, right? She's utterly unhinged. Like, I never thought the Tories could get any worse, and she is literally the absolute worst, right? Maybe, like, materially, she's not as bad as George Osborne, but the damage that she does to the collective body politic is so fundamentally huge.
And the big picture in all of this, Jane, is you will remember when the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street just over a year ago, promising a government of accountability, professionalism and integrity. The Home Secretary ever since then has been a thorn in his side over these matters. Now a number of MPs saying that she is simply out of control, and we wait to see how the Prime Minister will respond. What I think is clear from the press briefing from his official spokesperson.
Yeah, Priti Patel, right? Priti Patel, the woman who wanted to get wave machines to capsize small boats in the Channel, which would essentially just murder a bunch of asylum seekers. She is not as bad, not as draconian as Suella Braverman. Like, this is the world that we're living in right now.
This morning is he definitely isn't agreeing with this and trying to make it go away. So I think we've got to watch this space to see how it develops today. We haven't seen the Home Secretary this morning. There was an urgent question in the House of Commons. As I understand it, she is with a family member at the moment. So we haven't seen her yet. But I think this story has some way to run today.
Oh my God, there's still more. There's still yet more about it going on. Don't you worry, right? So this comes down when it came out 3 hours ago. It is that the Number 10 has disowned the Suella Braverman article attacking the police over the protests. The article was not cleared by Downing Street and suggested changes of the text were not allowed, Number 10 says. Keir Starmer has accused Braverman of undermining the police and said Prime Minister Sunak was too weak to do anything about it. That's going to be the Labour line. The Labour line are going to absolutely go in really hard on the disunity and the weakness. You can see how Tory the Labour Party are now, in that their focus is on weakness and on disunity, and not indeed any of the things that she said, or the positions that she holds, or any of the ideology that she supports. They only talk about it in terms of kind of the political manoeuvring around these things, right? It's a very kind of Tory way of acting, or I guess establishment politician way of acting, if you want to put it that way. One senior Conservative MP told the BBC the Home Secretary's awfulness is now a reflection on the Prime Minister. Keeping her in post is damaging him. And Danny Kruger has denied the Home Secretary was interviewing and said she was entitled to comment on the broader culture of the police. Danny Kruger, as well, is one of her friendos who also believes in the cultural Marxism and conspiracy theory. So their piece in a pod, yeah, real absolute lunatics fringes of the Conservative Party. Michael Gove is backing her up, right? Michael Gove, probably was one of the most kind of like openly Islamophobic MPs in Parliament. It's no surprise that he is backing Suella Braverman over the comments that she's made about the protesters. Remember, Michael Gove was right at the top of the Trojan horse stuff. He was the one who originally leaked the letter that turns out to be a complete lie. And Number 10 spokesperson has said Downing Street was looking into what happened over the article, but that Mr. Sunak had full confidence in the Home Secretary. Ministerial Code says all major interviews and media appearances, both print and broadcast, should be agreed with the Number 10 press office. The Prime Minister can punish a minister who's deemed to have breached the code. Options can range from demanding a public apology to sacking them. So it just shows how weak that he truly is, that he's not going to make her do either of these things. So first of all, let's see what Labour have to say about her in this regard. We've got Jonathan Reynolds, who is as awful as he is bald. Let us watch what he has to say about this, and then we'll move on to Mary MacDonald.
Shadow Business and Trade Secretary in the form of Jonathan Reynolds is here this morning. Good morning. Where do we start?
Well,
with the Home Secretary. What is that about?
It's just genuinely out of control. But it's irresponsible, it's divisive, and fundamentally, it's so obvious what is going on here. This is a person who is completely driven by their own agenda, their own ambition. We know that. It's not a surprise there, as you say. But where is the Prime Minister in this? Do we believe the Prime Minister signed off that kind of inflammatory rhetoric?
We don't know. We've asked.
Well, he won't tell us. But why is he really too weak to sack his Home Secretary? I mean, that's the question we've got to ask. And I'll just say, look, in all of this is a difficult time in lots of different ways. Surely the job of Home Secretary, the job of protecting the public, is one that demands respect, public service, not undermining the police, they've got enough on, not undermining their operational independence.
Yeah, was the Casey report undermining the police? We already know that the police, especially the Met, are not only corrupt as hell, but they're also entirely full of the most unscrupulous individuals who've done all number of depraved things. We have continual officers being taken off their post for things that they've done in contravention of things that they shouldn't be doing. So much so that we just have thousands of officers not on duty anymore because they're all awful individuals. And, well, we have to show solidarity with the police. No, we really don't, Jonathan, right? It's just the one thing that they are doing that isn't bad is upholding the law with regards to this weekend's protests.
I just cannot believe. And we have to find out today from the Prime Minister, did he sign off? Did he agree to this? And if not, is he too weak to sack her?
Well, good with that. Good luck with that, rather, because we have been trying. But, in all seriousness, perception is reality. She does, her views mirror quite a lot of the British public.
Well, I would disagree with that. I don't think there's any substance to Suella Braverman other than her own ambition. I think she'd trample over any principle or person in the pursuit of her own ambitions. But I think if we look specifically what we're talking about this weekend. I mean, look, for me, Remembrance Sunday, the activities of this weekend are sacrosanct. I will be leading in Hyde and Staley Bridge, which I represent, our remembrance services. We'll do a parade. We have our brass bands there. It's a hugely important part of what we do. But of course, where the police say they can manage other activity in a way which will not interfere in those incredibly important services and activities, surely you've got to respect the operational independence of the police. They've got enough to do. It's a difficult job, rather than undermine them, particularly if you are the Home Secretary. So I think she's got this wrong, and she needs to reflect on her own behaviour.
Here's a tricky one for you. We've just had Dal Babu, I don't know if you heard him, former Chief Superintendent with the Met Police, on the programme. He says she gets away with stuff because she's a brown woman, and if she was a white woman or a white man, she wouldn't.
Well, look, I wouldn't want to get into that. I think you judge everyone on what they've said, their own behaviour.
Not wrong. Literally not wrong at all. There's so much that she gets away with because it's okay for her to say her as a person of colour.
Their own activity as a politician, and just
which she shouldn't get away with. She shouldn't get away with it because lots of it's just racism.
What she does and what she says, there is no doubt that Suella Braverman is out of control, that her behaviour is irresponsible. I think the issue about getting away with it, as you say, well, look, the Prime Minister is accountable for the whole. Exactly, absolutely. The Prime Minister is responsible for all of his government. If he cannot sack someone, if he hasn't agreed to this statement going out, that's about his political weakness, not about the Home Secretary and whatever criteria or whatever background she's brought into this argument. It's about the Prime Minister, and we have to find that out today.
You know what I'm going to ask you next. Please answer me honestly. Should the Prime Minister sack her?
Yes, of course. Unless he has signed off on these views, unless they are his views.
So the Home Secretary should be sacked by the Prime Minister today?
Well, unless she's simply representing his view. I mean, if they won't tell us that, it may well be the case, though I would imagine if he had signed off on that statement, he would have found it quite easy to tell you and me this morning, so we would know that. But if you have a Home Secretary that is so out of control, so divisive, so inflammatory, undermining the police and therefore the national security and safety of the public, that's not someone who should be Home Secretary.
So you should sack her, in your opinion?
She should have been sacked ages ago. She should have been sacked over the homeless thing. She should have been sacked over the multiculturalism has failed stuff. She should have been sacked over everything that she said about there being an invasion on the South Coast. She shouldn't have been in the position in the first place, and the fact that she was there in the first place is such a massive damning indictment of our entire political system. The handling the document stuff that she got sacked in the first place and then was reappointed 3 days later. There's no reason that she should be in the position that she's in. But of course, Labour are now in the position where they can say to sack her because she said bad things about the boys in blue. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.